Hey Encino, we've made exciting upgrades to your Amazon Fresh store, and it's time to celebrate with savings. Whether you're picking up this week's grocery haul or today's hot lunch, Amazon Fresh is your spot for big deals on your favorite items. Head to amazon.com/grocery store opening to find weekly deals, info on upcoming events, and more. Visit your refreshed Amazon Fresh grocery store in Encino on Ventura Boulevard.
Blog Talk Radio. Blog Talk Radio.
Live from Los Angeles, the Win Without Competing Show with Dr. Arlene Barrow, Career Coach 1 and author of Win Without Competing. Now, here's Dr. Arlene.
Thank you, Virgil. Welcome to my show. In tough economic times, it is especially important to implement my Right Fit method, which will enable you to win without competing in your career and in your life. Listen to learn about my Right Fit method from my guest interviews of employees, entrepreneurs, and intrapreneurs. The Pretzel Effect. Flexibility is the key to success. My guest today is award-winning journalist Mark A. Davis, Director of Communications for the UCLA Alumni Association, former music columnist for The Advocate, and active community volunteer. Drawing on his nearly 20 years of experience at UCLA, Mark will discuss the challenges that come with long-term employment, his strategies for coping with change, and how he has developed and transferred his skills to welcome new opportunities through organizational changes. Welcome, Mark. Tell us, where did you grow up and what did you like to do as a child?
Hi, Dr. Arlene. I just wanted to say thank you for having me today. It's
my pleasure, Mark. I can't wait to discuss
the
Pretzel Effect, which I coined, and of course I love it. So do go on and tell us about your childhood.
Okay. I grew up where the farms meet the suburbs outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. Little area called Peach Grove, Ohio.
Where was that? Where is that Peach Grove, Ohio? Whereabouts would that be in relation to a major city?
It's about 15 miles outside of Cincinnati toward the Indiana border.
Okay.
We were I think the last suburban street in the middle of cornfields.
So it was picturesque.
It was. There were, when I grew up, I always our houses, two houses we lived in, were always had a cow pasture in the back with lots of woods and creeks, and so I spent a lot of time off playing in the woods. A lot of imaginary games. There was always a storyline going through my head when I was off playing.
Now, did that start because your parents read to you? How do you think that started, a storyline running through your head?
My mother always did read to us, even when we were small. I remember her reading to us Huck Finn and Robin Hood, books that probably were even beyond us, beyond our maturity level, but she read to us regularly, and I think it instilled the idea of story into my head at a very early age, and my mother was very good at encouraging imagination.
What did your parents do, Mark?
My dad was a banker, worked in savings and loan and as a bank manager. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom, but she was the an artsy, craftsy kind of streak. So she always had a business working out of the home. She worked several years. She ran an upholstery business out of the basement.
So now, did she personally do the work, or she had people come in to do it? Because basically, she was an entrepreneur.
Oh,
so
she did the work herself, and my brother and I were employed as the furniture movers.
That's terrific.
That was my first job. It didn't pay well.
It didn't pay well, but that's terrific. But I'm sure your mother appreciated your help.
Oh, yeah.
So now, as you were growing up, how did you seed your journalism career? What really transpired? You mentioned about story ideas going through your head. What else was going on? Did you start to write at an early age? Did you start to tell stories? How did it all evolve? We want to walk through your road with you.
Okay. Well, as I said, I had an older brother, and my mother encouraged our creativity. My older brother was good at drawing and doodling, and I don't know if it was to pick something that he didn't do or what, but I remember from a very early, like first grade, I started making up stories. You're writing stories for school projects. It's something that really captured me. If there was a way, it was a way teachers could use to spur me to show interest in my work, is to kind of pose the assignments as storytelling. And I was always a very big reader. From the minute I'm the type of kid who would show up at baseball practice, and I'd sit in right field because, of course, that's where I always played, and I'd be cross-legged and reading a book, and the ball would drop next to me.
Did you daydream a lot when you were in class, thinking about your story ideas?
I didn't daydream so much, but I had an active mind. I had this ability that I could listen to what was going on in class and at the same time disrupt my neighbors. The smarter teachers that I had realized that if they could give me something to do with my hands, to keep my hands occupied, I wouldn't bother the children sitting next to me.
Ah, so you were a mischievous child then.
I probably had a streak of that, yes.
Okay, all right. Going further, let's fast forward you to college. After you graduated from college, where you majored in print journalism with concentrated studies in English and theater arts, what was your first job and how did you get it?
Well, my first job actually was at the end of my college career. I got an internship with Cincinnati Magazine for one summer, and
how did you arrange the internship?
I went out and actively sought for internships. I was looking for something that I could do near where my parents lived, so I wouldn't have to worry about rent and that kind of thing. And I had it in my mind that I really liked magazine journalism because I liked feature writing because it gave you a little bit more leeway to tell a story.
Do you remember how you pitched yourself to get that first internship?
How I pitched myself? I think I pitched myself as diligent. I think I was upfront about, I don't have a lot of experience, but I have worked on the college paper. I have a real joy of writing, and I will write whatever assignment you give me. The woman who hired me had a reputation for being a particularly tough editor in Cincinnati. Her name was Lilia Brady. So when I got that job, I was working with one of the best in the city.
So now you had the internship, and did that lead to a full-time position, or you subsequently went on to something else?
Well, yes, I did the internship for the summer, And Lilia, who was a particularly stern judge, particularly of interns, liked my work. And so after I finished the internship, which was non-paying, she would bring me in to do paid assignments or to write some smaller stories for the magazine. And I did the cliche of waiting tables for almost a year.
All right, so your serious full-time job first was a waiter. Am I correct, Mark?
Correct. And you know what? I loved waiting tables, and I think what I've learned is no matter what job I do, I pick up skills that can apply to other professions that transfer really well. And just
how did you do that with the waiting? What did you pick up from doing the waiting?
The ability to just talk to people, to speak to strangers. This was a really nice restaurant. It catered to a wealthy clientele, which was it wasn't a type of person I had a lot of exposure to in my life. I picked up knowledge about food and wine, and so later in my career, I've ended up writing about food and wine. So that was the beginning of that education.
It sounds like you're a sponge soaking things up.
I think that's an accurate description.
Good.
If it sparks my interest, I want to devour it. I want to find out more.
So tell us how your mentor helped you get your first serious position.
Okay. So Lilia, there was another freelance writer who worked with Lilia at Cincinnati Magazine, and her name is Jean Peck. She was also the editor of the Alumni Magazine at the University of Cincinnati. And so Jean had a position open in her shop, and Lilia said, I've got this young kid for you. I think he would be great. And Lilia told me that the job was available, encouraged me to apply. I applied. I got the interview. And it's interesting because one of the things that Jean said to me in the interview, she said, I had to interview you because Lilia likes you and Lilia doesn't like anybody, which was a nice thing to hear.
It's terrific. So now, what did you share with her at the interview? Do you remember what kinds of things you talked about, and how did you really, what I call, package yourself to pitch so that the next step was that you received an offer from her?
Well, I think one of the things that got Jean's attention about me, in addition to Lilia's recommendation, with my resume, since I didn't have a lot of clips to include, I didn't have a lot of experience to point to. I did include a one-page kind of biography of myself, and I discussed kind of what my interests were, what I like to do in my spare time. And I mentioned a love of 18th century British literature, and that ended up connecting with Jean, who was doing the hiring, because that was also something that interested her. And she said she told me subsequently that it was important to her that the person she hired to write was also a reader. She said she had seen other resumes, talked to other candidates, and when she would ask them, what kinds of things do you read? And they would say, oh, I really don't read that much, or it set me apart.
It set you apart. It also gave you a personal brand, and what you did ultimately was you stopped Jean from continuing to shop. She no longer needed to interview any more candidates because she saw you as the right fit.
I have to say that looking back on that interview, I realized that after we had started our discussion, she was rooting for me. She wanted me to be the successful candidate, I could tell.
Well, because the chemistry must have been right between both of you as well. So how long were you with Jean, and how did you develop your skills there?
Well, when Jean hired me, she said, I'm looking for someone who is not going to be satisfied with this job in the long term. She This was in the mid-'80s, so the employment market, oddly, was a little bit like it is now. But she said there's not a lot of room to grow because I'm in this. I don't plan on going anywhere. My associate editor has an 8-year-old son, and she's planning on staying here until he finishes college because the University of Cincinnati has tuition remission. So she told me up front, I want somebody who's going to do this job and learn in this job and then be eager to find the next thing.
So she made it clear that it was not a long-term position.
Correct.
But basically, she was going to be grooming you, it sounds as if. Am I correct, Mark, that she was...
Yes.
She saw herself as grooming you. I think that's another reason why she was very particular as to selecting the right person, because why would she invest a lot of herself in someone that she didn't think would be a successful journalist in relation to what she viewed as her standards?
And she gave me a lot of encouragement. She gave me a lot of ability, challenging assignments that were maybe right outside of my reach, or maybe what I thought were right outside of my reach.
Can you remember some of those?
I remember I was assigned to interview Suzanne Farrell, who was one of George Balanchine's ballerinas. In fact, that his main ballerina, and I wasn't quite sure who she was, but I was aware enough to be a little bit afraid. So I did a lot of research, and it's an assignment that usually would have gone to a writer, maybe a more seasoned writer. When another department came to us and said, we want a newsletter for our department, and we really need somebody to do this for us, which is an assignment that would usually go to someone with more experience, Jean asked me if I was interested and said, if you want to do this, we'll help you do it, but I want you to take the lead. You know, we'll show you the parameters, but I want you to take the lead and run with this.
And so how did both of these projects turn out? The one where you interviewed the ballerina, and then this next project that you just described?
For the Suzanne Farrell story, I remember my opening question was, it was a story from her childhood about how she and a friend would dance with the chairs in her mother's living room, and they would pretend that that the chair was the primary male dancer at the time. And so I brought this story up and based a question on that, and it immediately put her at ease. I remember her response was, "How did you know?" That she smiled at the memory and said, "How did you find out that story? How did you find that story?" And it helped the rest of the interview flow very easily. And I think Suzanne Farrell is someone who had a reputation of being a little closed off, a little hard to get to talk to. I think it was part of one of the things that made her such a great Balanchine ballerina, is that he was able to layer his vision onto her, and she could display that.
So you successfully reached her, obviously, by knowing what
yes.
she did as a child.
I did.
So then, how did Jean respond to that? To the quality of what you had written in terms of this interview?
I got a prime spot in the magazine with that story. In fact, that story became one of the centerpieces of my clip file. Now, for the newsletter, I actually got to kind of pound that out. And I remember I did it for the admissions department, and one of my ideas for this newsletter, they said, well, we have to share important information with incoming students, with applicants, with people interested in the school, and how are you going to do that in a creative way that would appeal to a young audience? And I developed this character, the UC advice lady. And the UC advice lady, I had an image of her in my head, and she had a nice, I guess how I would describe her as a stern librarian type who, if you looked again, you could see a twinkle in her eye.
Okay, so you created this character, and then what did you do with the character?
Well, I talked to an illustrator who did a version of her that we could run, and so we had kind of the basic illustration of her, and we would do different things to her. She'd have a pencil sticking out of her hair, or one time we put her in a football helmet, or we just do little things to her that adapted to the advice. But what would happen is students would write in and ask their questions about the University of Cincinnati, or what do I do once I get there? And she was helpful. She was helpful. She was stern. She always had a kind word to say, though. And I was excited because this is the first time that I had kind of created a character like this, and it was very personal to me. And it was also funny because it was so different from who I was.
Nobody knew that you were that character then.
No one knew.
They thought it
was
the advice lady, right? Okay, all right. I know we're going to hear more about that later. Let's look at what did Jean do after you had been there a year or 2 years. How long were you there where she decided it was time to push you out of the nest?
Well, she had, as I said, she told me up front, I don't want someone who's going to be in this position long. Yeah, and it's at one point she, I guess maybe 2.5, 3 years into it, she started asking me questions. I remember whether I was satisfied in my situation. Was I kind of getting bored with the assignments? In fact, I think it's similar to something you mentioned in Win Without Competing, where you talk about probing. And in retrospect now, I know what she was doing. She was probing to see if this was still a right fit job for me.
Because she was hoping that it would not be, because she knew it was time for you to move on, because it was an entry-level position, and obviously you were growing above and beyond it.
So she encouraged me to start. She would encourage me to start looking, and started pointing me toward things. The Chronicle of Higher Education, for instance, the one ads there. I remember she pointed out to me. I don't know if you're aware, Mark, but we have this publication, that I had been using for other research. But she said, I want to pay attention to the classifieds in the back and just kind of dream about what kind of job you want to do next. So it wasn't telling me to get out, but it was inspiring me to see what a future me might be.
And how long had you been there when she started probing away?
I'm sorry?
How long had you been working with her when she started to probe away?
I'd say about 3 years. About
okay.
3.5 years, I think.
And then what happened next?
I took her advice. I started looking at different jobs. I remember specifically I was thinking about, okay, what do I want to do next? Do I want to stay in Cincinnati? What kind of job do I want? And I remember specifically I just started applying for any position as practice, to get my resume together, to remind myself how to write a good cover letter. I remember there was a job in Walla Walla, Washington. I remember there was a job in Sewanee, Tennessee. And I applied for them, but I knew that probably wasn't the place for me. I think I realized that I didn't want to stay in Cincinnati because the area where I grew up is an area where people's grandparents had lived in the same house that they lived in, and I wanted to see something else of the world. I wanted to see what other places were like. So I found this one ad at UCLA, and I had photocopied it, and the photocopy sat on my desk, and it sat on my desk. And one day Jean walked by, and she looked at it, and she said, "Are you going to apply for this job, or am I going to fire you?"
I love this. Jean is really a delight. Did you subsequently stay in touch with her after you left your position, Mark?
In fact, last August I stayed with Jean and her husband in Portland, Maine.
Oh, my. All these years, and you've still been friends. It's wonderful.
I have to say that was a very nurturing environment, that first job. I was close with Jean, and my other coworker, my other mentor there, Debbie Rieselman, is still like a sister to me. She spends holidays at my parents' house in Cincinnati, whether I'm there or not. So
now trace the path. How did you actually get to UCLA? You applied. What happened next?
What happened next is I came up with a mountain of excuses of why I couldn't do it and why I was not going to succeed in this application process.
Do you remember what the title of the position was?
I believe it was Publications Manager.
Okay.
But when Jean asked me, "Are you going to apply for the job?" It's because the ad had been sitting there, and she knew that I hadn't yet. So I came up with my first barrier, my first artificial barrier, which was, well, the applications are due, in a couple of days, so there's no way I can get my resume there in time. And Jean said, well, there's a fax number there. We have a fax machine. And I said, well, but this is when the days when fax machines had those long rolls and it would spit out that curled paper. And
right.
I said, well, that's not how I want my resume to arrive at UCLA. I want it to be on nice paper. And she said, just stop making excuses. So it arrives on curled paper. You send a hard copy along, but just do it. Stop making excuses and do it. And so I did it. I took her advice. I went ahead and faxed my resume. I worked on it. I had worked on the cover letter. And about a week and a half later, I had gotten home from work. I got a phone call, and it was UCLA interested in conducting a phone interview with me.
Were you shocked when you got the phone call?
Oh, yes. It wasn't expected, and I don't know. I was doing housework or something, I remember, because I kind of had to drop everything and sit down and say, okay, if I'm going to talk now, I need to do those right things. I need to kind of sit where I can see a mirror and make sure that I have a good expression on my face while I'm talking and get my resume in front of me so I can refer to it. In fact, one of the clips, one of my showpiece clip was the story, the interview with Suzanne Farrell. And there was another story that I wrote. It was about how pharmacists in the future, in the 90s, would start taking over some of the duties from doctors. And I started out with an imaginary, an imaginary what if. And the story went: you go to your doctor examines you, but she suggests that you talk to your pharmacist about what comes next. And I guess the fact that in 1990 I had made this imaginary doctor a woman also impressed UCLA, that I hadn't automatically defaulted that the doctor would be a man.
Terrific. So now, what transpired during the phone interview? What did you discuss? What were they really trying to figure out? Did they know exactly the specs of the right fit person, or were they just sort of fishing? Were they going to then interview lots of people? What sense did you get?
Well, I remember we had some discussion of my skills. Doug Reese was the hiring manager then. He had mentioned the story. He said that we want somebody who is thinking a little different and who is aware of those kinds of issues. So he specifically mentioned the story with the pharmacist, and that impressed him. But the conversation veered off, and again, it's funny. He asked me what I was reading at the time, and so I talked about. I believe I was reading David Levitt's Lost Language of Cranes at the time, And it turned into a conversation of what I was reading and the type of literature that interested me. And, I was lucky again that this was the hiring manager knew the book that I was talking about and, respected the book that I was talking about and the kinds of literature that I was reading. So about 2 weeks later, I was flying out to Los Angeles to interview on the UCLA campus. I had an interview there with, I think it was 5 people, and I was very nervous. They put me in this, we were interviewing there were couches. We were in a kind of a lounge where we were interviewing, and I either had to sit back in the couch, which I sank down in, or I had to kind of perch on the edge. I remember sitting down in that chair and trying to find the best way to present myself in that challenging
really
situation.
Important. Yeah, no, I'm glad that you're aware about how you presented yourself in the manner in which you were sitting was very important, because it is very important. So it's amazing how you were aware of so many things at a young age.
I subsequently found out that the hiring manager would kind of purposely do some things like that in interviews. There was another interview where he had kind of redirected lights so that all the lights in the room were subtly, but they were all hitting the candidate, because he wanted to see what kind of how people would react. In fact, the night before my interview, Doug said, "Meet me at the Alumni Association building. We'll go out for dinner." And he took me to a Chinese restaurant in the Village and said, "Why don't you order for both of us?" And I remember being taken off guard and thought, well, that's odd. I don't know anything about this person. So I had to think quickly and say, okay, we'll order, one chicken dish, one vegetarian dish, because I'm in California and that may be an issue, and one spicy dish and one mild dish. I remember this thought process. Okay, how am I going to do this? So there's a high likelihood that no matter what he wants, there's probably something there he can or will eat. And Doug told me later, he said, yeah, I wanted to see what your reaction would be. I wanted to see how you would react in a situation like that.
Well, he wanted to see if you could take charge. He gave you an opportunity to take charge, and you took charge, because obviously you didn't start in discussing it with him. Am I correct, Mark?
Correct.
Yeah, so you just took charge. He wanted, because he was fast-forwarding to if, in fact, he would hire you and he gave you an assignment, would he need to discuss the assignment to death, or could you take the ball and run with it? So that was a test, and obviously you scored an A+ here. I think it's terrific. It's a very interesting test.
After, I guess about 2 weeks after I flew to Los Angeles, I got the call, and it was funny because I was talking to Gene back in Cincinnati, and I was to the point where I had been on pins and needles. I said, obviously they don't want me. It's taken so long. Obviously they don't want me. I'm just going to call and I'm going to tell them, never mind, take my name out of it. And it was about me feeling unwanted, I guess. About me being a little insecure about what was happening. And
well, that's a common feeling at all ages, Mark. Yeah, because people make the erroneous assumption that if you have to wait many weeks, the employer isn't interested. That's incorrect, because you don't really know what the cause of the waiting is. Could be a budgetary issue, could be that the decision maker wasn't available to make the final decision. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons, so that you should feel comfortable that this is just normal for people to feel this way. So then what happened next? Well, what did Jean say? She probably told you it was nonsense.
She said exactly. She said, it's nonsense.
Right.
Stop being a baby. Just be patient.
Because she probably gave a reference to them.
Exactly. What I found out later is that she had already spoken with Doug, and Doug had already said, I'm going to offer him the job. I just need to get final confirmation from my supervisor before I can actually make the offer.
So I'm correct, and I didn't even know that was the story.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's a common situation. So
it's a really dangerous. What I found is it's really dangerous when you start trying to assign motive to someone when you're 3,000 miles away and don't know them.
So you must have been
never a good plan.
Yeah, well, you must have been absolutely thrilled. Now, you started at UCLA in 1991, and you've made many contributions, including you are the founding editor of 3 publications, the UCLA Alumni Magazine, the Connect at UCLA e-newsletter, and the UCLA Alumni Network newsletter. Share with us your UCLA career story, the challenges you faced, and how you handled them. The listeners can't wait to hear about the Pretzel Effect.
Well, the interesting thing is I was hired to be a half-time writer, a half-time graphic designer. That was the description. Desktop publishing was the newest thing, and I knew enough from school to do basic kind of newspaper layout. I knew those principles, and I had taught myself at University of Cincinnati to use the desktop publishing software, and that is what made me an attractive candidate. One of the things that really made me an attractive candidate at UCLA. So my job for the first, I think 3 years was to write and edit a publication, a tabloid publication. And after a couple of years into this, I really realized that my limitations as a graphic designer, and I remember going to my boss, and we were kind of going back and forth. How do we fix this? The newsletter it just looks a little dated. And I had to have the courage to say, I know how to use the software, but that doesn't make me a designer. And I think that we could probably do a better job with this if we hired somebody who had the skill, or if we had some freelance money. So I had to admit that that's a weakness of mine, and somebody else can do it better.
Well, I think it's good that you recognize that. After all, they didn't hire you as a graphic designer. It sounds like they thought, I guess, that you were able to do what they would give you, apparently.
And it was the first time that my job morphed, and I think that's the key to why I've been at the UCLA Alumni Association for so long, and why, like any job, it's had its ups and downs, and there have been some periods of that employment that have been very challenging for me. But every 3 to 4 years, my job changes, my title seems to change, the people I work with sometimes change. Luckily, my salary has also continued to change in a positive direction.
Well, that's a good thing. So now, when a challenging situation occurs, what do you do to handle that? I know that we talked about community involvement, and how has that played a part in your life and helped you with the Pretzel Effect?
I think probably the best example is we had some funding challenges at the association. A revenue stream that we had dried up. At the same time, there was some movement on campus. I had founded the magazine for the Alumni Association and done it for about 10 years. But there was, from the chancellor, he was kind of looking at what the university was sending out, and he saw that there was it would be better if we sent out one magazine as opposed to several magazines to our audience. That happened simultaneously with some revenue drying up. So I had spent 10 years developing a self-image based on I'm a magazine editor. That's what I do. That's who I am. Defining myself as that job.
So you were you saw yourself as one and the same. You were the magazine editor, and that was your identity.
Right.
Okay.
And so when things changed, differences in funding, differences in staffing, my boss came to me and said, this is going away, but don't worry, you're still valuable to us, and there are other things we need you to do. But I was crushed because I felt like I felt like who I was had gone away, and I was going through this period where I wasn't feeling very happy at work. What was happening is things were changing, like happens to all of us in the workplace, and I was resistant to that change. Part of the way that I overcame that is I started looking in my community involvements. I started looking for opportunities to learn new things, and there was a leadership development program offered by the Southwest California Synod, which is a part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. And I signed up for this 2-year program because I thought, well, maybe there's something I can learn here, that will feed a need in me that I'm not necessarily getting in my workplace right now.
And so how did that work out? How did that help you to develop yourself further and basically disassociate yourself so that you didn't see yourself as only the magazine editor-in-chief?
Well, I think what it did is well, first place at work, part of me being a magazine editor, I had put a lot of self-worth in what that was, and that self-worth with that position gone turned more into ego, I think. So I think I was a little bit difficult to deal with at work for a period there as I kind of adjusted, and I realized through this leadership program that a good deal of leadership is based in service. That if you approach a leadership position as I'm going to organize, I'm going to tell these people what to do, these people are going to do my will, it's often less successful than if you approach the job and say, I'm here to be of service to this organization. I'm here to help us all do something different. The leadership is service, and it helped me see what I was doing in my private life in a different way. It helped me. Subsequently, I got onto the board of directors for the synod, and I started exploring having different opportunities to learn than I necessarily had in the workplace. And what this did was, in the workplace, it allowed me to be humble and then start looking at my skills and saying, wait a minute, it was never about me being a magazine editor. It was about me being a good writer. It was about me being a good teacher to some of my peers and some of the newer employees. And those are skills that can be redeployed in any manner of ways. One of those might be as a magazine editor, but there are lots of other ways that I could be valuable to the organization, and suddenly I wasn't scared of the change.
So that all of a sudden you could view it objectively. You didn't take it personally anymore.
Right. And I say suddenly, but I have to correct that and say gradually I realized that there was nothing to be afraid of in the change. The organization was telling me I was still valuable, and we may take a while to figure out, what it is that you're best at. And, the tasks that I was being assigned, some of them I liked, some of them I didn't, but they trusted me to be able to carry those out and to help allow me to shape what I did next.
During the time that you described yourself as being a little difficult, were you concerned that this would become a problem, or you knew that they understood that you were evolving?
I think I would have to say there was a little bit of both.
Okay.
You know, there was part of me that said, there was part of me that just wanted to flee the situation. There was part of me that wanted to fix the situation. There was part of me that wanted to go back and say, no, let's go back to the way we did things 2 years ago, because I'm comfortable with that. I understand that. I think I was lucky that I was working with some supervisors who kind of allowed me, supervisors and peers, I have to say, who were patient with me until I did get back on my feet and say and realize that, you know, this change wasn't threatening. You know, nobody was telling me I didn't have a job anymore, and I have to say that the organization, because of what I was able to contribute before, was good about helping me explore what came next.
Well, that's why you're still there, I think, that they worked along with you. I think it's terrific. Mark? And
it prepared me for what did come next, which was 2 years ago, the organization got a new executive director, and Ralph Amos, who has a great vision for what alumni relations is in this country and what alumni relations can do specifically at UCLA, and how we can carry that industry, that mission forward in ways that haven't really been done in this profession. And I'm lucky that I had that opportunity to get comfortable with change a few years ago, because there's a lot of change going on now, and I'm actually able to coach some of my coworkers through this change now.
Well, now you're the change maven. You're the change guru. It's terrific. I think it's really good because you learned how to handle it yourself, and now you can teach others. Now, you're an award-winning journalist who sets high standards for yourself. Which of your awards will you always remember, and why? You alluded to the new role you played at Cincinnati, so I'm hoping you're going to talk about that.
The award that I think means the most to me, I got from the International Association of Business Communicators, and it was a first place prize for best column in a publication, best columnist, and it was for the UC Advice Lady. And I think it means so much to me is because she really was a character that I created. She was a character that I created. She fulfilled the goal of what the institution was asking me to do, and she fulfilled it in a way that was very different from anything that they had expected. And it was just amusing to actually accept the award, because we were in a gorgeous old theater in downtown Cincinnati where they presented the awards, and they just like the Oscars, they did the whole thing. Here are the nominees, and the winner is UC Advice Lady, and they had a picture. They had a big projector, so you could actually see the illustration of the UC Advice Lady, and so they announced that it's the UC Advice Lady, and up pops this 26-year-old kid, this 26-year-old man.
Fabulous. Fabulous. So their mouths
the whole audience just roared as I got up to accept that award.
Oh, I think you must have been the hit of the evening. I think it's fabulous. Did they actually give you a plaque, or what did they give you?
Yes, I got a plaque.
You got a plaque. Now, you have a broad range of talents, including music. How did you qualify to become the music columnist for the national news magazine, The Advocate, and what kind of music did you review?
Well, I've always had an interest in music going back to school. For a brief time, when I was working at Cincinnati Magazine, in fact, and the University of Cincinnati, I was a singer in a bar band. It was a new wave kind of band. We did not very good music, but it was a great experience. And I was there a lot. I heard a lot of music by independent bands, unsigned bands, and it really just sparked an interest in me, but also an admiration and a respect for these kids who I'm sure, their parents all told them, don't do this, you got to have a day job, and they're out there doing the work. So I had always had a love of independent music, and Cincinnati has a long history of having an interesting independent music scene. When I came out to California, I had friends who were editors, and I had a friend who was the arts and entertainment editor at The Advocate. And one of the things they would do each year is they would, once or twice a year, they would do a column that focused on independent music. And I would read the column, and I would always think, I can do better. Or not even necessarily I can do better, but they can find more quality people to feature. And so I let him know, in a friendly way, let him know, and
you pitched yourself again, Mark.
When he was coming up on that assignment after I think twice I had registered my feelings, kind of said, look, there's better stuff. Let me help you. Let me help you the next time. And he said, you know what, you're not going to, after I've done that twice, the next time the assignment came up, he said, you're not going to complain this time because this time you're going to do the work. And he let me try out the assignment. I had a great time.
And how did that work out?
I had a great time. I explored what had come into the office, but I also went out and started looking for music that fit with the editorial mission of the magazine. Music that had quality packaging, that you could tell the musician had spent some time thinking about the cover and actually recording in a studio so that the quality of the sound was good. In addition to just being good music, you could tell I looked for people who were really putting their heart and their talent into the product, and had a great time going out and looking for good music to include. I did the first column, and my editor, my friend who was the arts and entertainment editor, got a lot of positive feedback from his boss. And so that turned into a regular gig.
So how did you figure out, in other words, what was the blueprint of the right fit person to write about in your column? What were the specs?
Well, as I said, I looked for quality music, but I looked for other things, the things that showed that the musician was really thinking about the entire final product. So how good was the quality of the recording? How good was the cover shoot? How good the cover letter. There were musicians who contacted me. I went out on the web was a great research tool for this kind of thing, and I went out looking for musicians, and I'd hear something and contact them and say, hey, do you have something new that you're working on that you'd like to share with me? And I think another rule I made for myself is that there's so much independent music out there. There's no need to badmouth somebody's work. I mean, if you're picking up a general interest music publication, and somebody wants to know, is the new Madonna album good or bad? Should I buy it or not? That's one thing, and fine, you can give Madonna a pan, and it's no big deal. But for this, there was limited space, there was limited ink, and I thought if it's not quality music, if it's not quality product, I don't have to mention it. Rather than trash someone's efforts, I'd rather just lift up to visibility the people who I thought deserved the visibility. So it actually allowed me to be more of a nice columnist, a nice critic. Right.
Rather than
right.
a negative critic.
It wasn't
right.
important to, if my reaction was, I don't like your music, I think it's trash, it wasn't necessary for me to say that in print. I would just move on to someone who, deserved the attention.
What advice do you have for our listeners who are unhappy at work?
I think a lot of it is look at yourself. Look at yourself and in your work situation. Is this job what you desire in a job? Is there a way to change the position that better fits your needs? If not, it may be time to go. Or maybe what you're feeling uncomfortable about in your position, is it really about your position, or is it about the fact that there's change? Is it about your fear that the job is going to go away, or your fear that the familiarity of your job is going to go away?
That you're uncomfortable with the change concept.
Right. And if you find that it's really just about things are changing and I'm not sure how to do what comes next, just let go, because chances are nobody knows how to do what comes next. Chances are, possibly even your supervisor, who is the one who's instituting the change, isn't quite sure what's going to come next. He or she is striving for something and is not quite sure how you're going to get there. So look at how you can be part of that plan. Look at, that's the time of opportunity, because when we're not quite sure how to organizationally how we're going to move the organization forward, it's a great time to say, okay, what is it that I want to do, and how does that contribute to this change?
Well, I think it's beautifully said, because quite often people become fearful rather than seeing it as an opportunity, welcoming it, and working with it, rather than running away from it.
And believe me, I've tried both, and I know which one has worked and which one hasn't.
Well,
but
we know it's worked, right?
Even with what's going on in our economy, if you look at, we're hearing, it's the worst time since the Depression. Allstate Insurance was founded during the Depression. My partner is a novelist and is looking at selling the film rights to a book, and was worried about the company that was interested. Did a little research and realized that this company was founded in the late 80s, early 90s, which is when film companies were going bust right and left. Orion closed down, TriStar closed down, and thought, these people in a bad economy figured out how to create a new film company and make it work. They're exactly the people I want to work with.
Well, Mark, it has just been an absolute delight. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you did as well.
I definitely did. I thank you very much for asking me to do this. It scared me, which is why I said yes.
Well, that's okay. You're at the other end. You're the person who's always arranging things for others to be interviewed, I'm sure, over the years. So that makes good sense why you were uncomfortable, but it worked out beautifully, and I really appreciate your sharing your innermost thoughts and feelings with us today. And I hope that you come back soon.
Thank you. Thank
you. Please join me again next Wednesday, April 1st at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. The Ann Edwards brand of celebrity biography. My guest will be Ann Edwards, Pulitzer Prize nominee for her biography, Early Reagan, and internationally best-selling biographer of Judy Garland, Vivian Leigh, Katharine Hepburn, and Margaret Mitchell, author of Gone with the Wind. A native of Los Angeles, she lived for several decades in Great Britain, where her biographies of Queen Mary, the present Queen's grandmother, Diana, Princess of Wales, Wallis, Duchess of Windsor, and royal sisters Elizabeth I and Princess Margaret are seminal books. Edwards will share memories of her early career as a child performer and her marriage to her third and present husband, Stephen Citron, pianist, composer, noted author of books on the musical theater and co-author with Edwards on a memoir and a musical. The Wrong Fit, Fix It or Flee. Our discussion today has helped us, I believe, learn more about how we can work with a situation in which the fit may not be exactly right. About 3 or 4 years ago, I introduced my workshop, The Wrong Fit, Fix It or Flee, to the National Society of Hispanic MBAs. Little did I know that many of the attendees would have work-related health problems. If you are suffering in a wrong fit job, please do contact me and let's arrange for you to attend the Wrong Fit, Fix It or Flee seminar on the west side of Los Angeles. You can reach me at 310-441-5305 to arrange a time to speak with me, or email me directly at drbarro, that's Dr. Barrow, at winwithoutcompeting.com. Moving your career forward. More than 12 million people are currently unemployed. Every minute, 15 people are losing their jobs. Those who blast their resumes from Burbank to Bombay could remain unemployed for many years because the competition mindset won't work in today's economic environment. Over and over, as the Barrow Global Search Inc. hear the same story. I emailed 100, and even 600 resumes hoping to get interviews. The result is either no response or perhaps a few interviews. The solution is simple. The job seeker must use my Right Fit method, which is a unique set of strategies to identify the right fit job, to convince the employer to interview you and hire you as the one right fit candidate at the salary that you want. The goal is to stop the employer from wanting to interview other people, and I refer to it as stop the employer from shopping. To learn more about my Right Fit method, visit winwithoutcompeting.com and read excerpts from Win, which was nominated for a Business Book Award. To purchase Win, click on the Buy page and select the Right Fit bookseller for you. Interested in finding out about my nationwide coaching services conducted by phone? Visit drbarro.com, that's drbarrow.com, or winwithoutcompeting.com. To arrange a time to speak with me directly, call 310-441-5305. Master the Right Fit method and hear your hot Saturday or Sunday afternoon seminars on the west side of Los Angeles. To find out more, please email me or call me directly. Space is limited, currently selecting participants for May and June. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, remember this trigger tip. It's all up to you to change your career and your life. Goodbye for now. This is Dr. Arlene, author, Win Without Competing, Career Coach 1, and founder and CEO, Barrow Global Search, Inc.
Have you Googled yourself lately? Are there negative posts from an ex-employee or from a former client? Maybe an outdated news article? Search engines don't always get it right. For right or wrong, it's your reputation on the line. That's where Reputation Defender by Norton comes in. Take control with Reputation Defender. Their cutting-edge approaches help you to wipe away unwanted information in your search results. They also promote the good stuff. You can start by getting your free Reputation Report Card at ReputationDefender.com or call 800-811-4975 to speak to an expert.
I'm normally the person who starts the chats, plans the dates, so it was nice to...
Let someone else do the work for once?
Weirdly, yeah.
I mean, the rave was a surprise.
I just wasn't ready to go home, you know?
I wasn't either. By date 6, we'd done every activity in Santa Monica.
So crazy, but so fun.